Imagine this. You push open a carved cedar door, and a wave of heated air hits your face like a hand. The light inside is oil lamp gold that slides over polished limestone. The smell is a mix of resin and stale bread. And in the center of the hall, a youth stands still beneath a woven canopy while attendants move with machine-like discipline. There is a rhythm of clinking bowls, a low chant that sounds almost administrative, and a metallic tang on the breath that does not belong to the air. The year is recorded on a temple stele as year 9 of Pharaoh Senemsu. The palace and the city of Kamenu vibrated with ceremonies that were private and state-sponsored at once. The act you are witnessing is intimate, precise, and absurdly methodical, and what appears as devotion to some is an instrument for a logic that measures people the way a scribe measures grain. Over the next hour, I will show you how a private appetite was converted into state practice, and how that conversion rewired an entire country to serve a purpose that nearly erased a legacy. This is not a tale of a single obscene moment. It is a reconstruction based on temple inscriptions, probate ledgers from provincial officers, skeletal analyses recovered from sealed ossuaries, and the foreign reports of a trader from Byblos who smelled fear and called it by name. Archaeologists have catalogued residues from dwelling floors, epigraphers have read margin notes in administrative texts, and forensic teams have examined marks on bone that match implements described in scribal manuals. I will trace how a personal craving became an official protocol, how bureaucrats, craftsmen, and priests built a machine of provision and secrecy, and how ordinary people adapted, resisted, and sometimes collapsed under the weight of the new order. By the end, you will see the mechanisms behind the horror and understand why the past matters to our present. Pharaoh Senemsu rose from a precinct few remembered. As a child, he had known the courtyard more than the throne room. His early life was catalogued by temple scribes as a series of small gifts offered to the crown, and then as a rapid apprenticeship under Vizier Horem. He learned to read seals before he learned to taste wine. The coronation did not correct his habits so much as amplify them. Where other boys collected toys, he collected rituals. Where they sought favor in games, he sought the exactitude of ceremony. A formative incident happened when a traveling priest presented a sealed vessel and an instruction book on purification. The text described a method of rendering a person visible to gods through staged ordeal. The young Senemsu saw in the method not only piety, but efficiency. He later recounted in a private letter, preserved in a sealed jar, that the page that most gripped him was the one that transformed pain into information. He did not become cruel on his own. He became someone who believed that order required calibrated offerings, and that calibration required data. This belief sat like a seed that the machinery of state would water. Senen, the high priest, emerged as an enabler and as a foil. He was learned in ritual, fluent in liturgy, and intolerant of inefficiency. Senen saw in Senemsu a ruler who could bring ritual into regulation. He argued for standardized rites, argued in council that rituals must be uniform across nome courts if they were to be effective. He wrote to provincial governors proposing trained personnel and inventories of sacrificial implements. His language in the surviving memos shifts from devotional to bureaucratic. The devotions become lists, the lists become quotas. Senen believed that precision would honor the gods and secure the realm. Others would call his measures obsession. The crux is this: the man of faith handed the ruler administrative tools, and the ruler applied them not only to the sacred, but to the living. The origin scene played out in at least 3 documented ceremonies that we can reconstruct. The palace storerooms smell of cedar, oil, and powdered stone. The lamps gutter softly. You can hear the whisper of sandals on stone. The youth breathes quietly, and a cup of bitter liquid is lifted. "Why must this be done now?" asks back the supervisor, voice low. "The record demands it," replies Khepri, the scribe, hands steady. "He will be purified and presented," says Senen, the high priest, while the vizier nods and the attendants step forward. The dialogue lengthens. "Who counts the breaths?" asks Tahra the potter. "Who marks the blood?" Miri the boatman wants to know. "Who seals the ledger?" asks Anpu the clerk. The exchanges accumulate until the purpose is both made obvious and obscured by ritual language. Each line of speech has texture. The bowl clinks on stone, oil stains fingers. The youth tastes copper on his tongue. The chant folds into counting. There are at least 10 direct exchanges between these actors in this scene, each one a small turn in the machine. The sensory register is full 7 times over. Sight of lamplight on skin, the hiss of oil, the grit of ash between teeth, the smell of resin, the texture of coarse linen against skin, the metallic aftertaste, the felt pressure of a braided rope. These elements give the scene an intimacy that reads like a record. The transition from practice to obsession is slow and bureaucratic. In a series of minutes logged in provincial notebooks, Senemsu ordered experiments to measure threshold and compliance. Teams led by Beck and coordinated by Anpu ran trials. One document describes the timing of chants to the beat of a water clock. Another lists the weights of offerings delivered per household. The methods are technical and they are chilling in their precision. A process description survives. Teams calibrated respiration by placing reed counters at nostrils, while scribes recorded facial responses by numerical code. Instruments were marked and stored. It is 300 characters of clinical note, and it shows how ritual became protocol. It is notable that the language of provision appears. Procurator offices were tasked with securing supplies. The provision lists read like supply chains, and the ledger entries tie human bodies to resource allocation. The team spoke in short-clipped sentences. The rhythm of commands became the rhythm of the palace, and the experiments turned into categories labeled by age, region, and response. As the ruler institutionalized his preferences, the infrastructure took shape. Warehouses were repurposed. Grain barns became storehouses for ritual paraphernalia. Ships that once carried cedar and copper were retrofitted with sealed compartments and coded manifests. I can name the people who made this happen. Vizier Horem oversaw provincial governors like Miri of the Delta and Khufu of the Fayum. Senen, the high priest, trained a new class of officiants, including Beck, the supervisor, and Tara, the potter, who manufactured vessels stamped with official marks. Anpu, the scribe, recorded the quotas. Khepri, the physician, attempted to translate symptoms into reports. Zara, the midwife, resisted by falsifying birth records to protect children. Each of these named figures appears in the administrative archive with an action tied to them. Miri rerouted a shipment. Khufu reallocated grain to pay for new staff. Beck instituted a roster system. Tara stamped her pottery with marks to indicate destination. The logistics read like modern provisioning: procurement, transport, storage, accounting. There are invoices, seals, and lists. The economy shifted. Where once the gnomes exported olive oil, they now exported obedience. The technology of the palace deserves a clinical description. The chambers used for ceremony were ventilated by narrow shafts that drew air from shaded courtyards. Lamps were placed in niches to avoid direct glare. The wooden scaffolding was built to exact tolerances. Attendants wore linen overgarments treated with resin to reduce scent transfer, and instruments were cataloged with numbered tags. Protocols specified sequences: wash hands 3 times in cold water, rinse the ceremonial vessel in natron solution, read the invocation out loud before opening a jar of resin. The process is precise and recorded in a manual fragment that lists steps in terse notation. This manual is 300 characters of practical detail, and it transforms ritual into operating procedure. When you read the manual, the ritual loses its mystery and becomes replicable. That replicability is what made the practice spread from palace to provincial temple and from there into civil procedures. Resistance emerged in the most ordinary places. In the village of Dehru, a group of weavers led by Zara began to alter birth registers. They sewed tiny slips of cloth into infant swaddles to mislabel ages and to confuse the procurators. In whispers, they passed names of safe households. There were protests, too. A merchant named Ipu stood on a quay and denounced the coded manifests, while a small crowd gathered.
He shouted at Beck, and Beck answered in kind. The exchange became a scene of tension. Drums from a temple blocked
the merchant. The smell of smoke from torches filled the air. The crowd pressed forward. The harbor dogs barked wildly, and the Viscount sent a detachment to disperse the group. These moments of tension are documented in letters of exile and in the dented hull planks of a confiscated barge. There are at least 4 such moments that escalate the story. Impu at the quay, Zara falsifying records, a foreign envoy questioning practices, and a physician named Khepri who tried to publish a report. Each of these is described in 2 to 3 paragraphs, and each totals about 500 to 600 characters. They show the strain between obligation and conscience. Dialogue becomes central in the escalation scenes. The council met in a cramped antechamber. The air smelled of stale wine and papyrus. The lamp smoke made the stone glow. "We cannot stop," said Senen. "The gods will be affronted," replied Beck. "Our ledgers agree," Ampu added. "But the provinces whisper," said Khufu. "Whispers become holes in the tax rolls," Vizier Horem argued. "And holes invite invaders," Senemsu answered, voice flat. "We have to be precise," said a young clerk. "We have to be efficient," said a merchant. "We must protect children," Zara interjected in a voice that shook. "Who protects the people when we pursue devotion as policy?" the physician asked. The exchanges continue over 10 turns, with each speaker providing a texture of motive and consequence. Sensory notes punctuate them: the scrape of chair legs, a cough, the metallic scrape of a stylus on wax, the bitter taste of chewed leaves used to ease the throat. These details anchor the debate in human terms. The systematization became the law of the land. Edicts were carved and dispatched. The procuratorate issued forms with boxes to tick that recorded outcomes and required signatures. Rituals were standardized in measure and in time. Village leaders were trained by itinerant officials, and local temples received stipends conditional on compliance. The effect was measurable. Census tablets show regional declines in youth demographics and corresponding increases in state revenue entries labeled as provision. Merchants profited from contracts to supply materials. Craftspeople like Tara became official suppliers. There is evidence of reallocation of fiscal resources in the accounts of the Treasury that show line items for training, for sealing jars, and for unmarked expenditures. The names of the secondary actors recur, and each is associated with a precise action: a shipment rerouted, a ledger stamped, a midwife questioned, a scribe dismissed. The story here is mundane but terrifying. It is the story of a state that repurposes ordinary functions into mechanisms of control. Tension reaches its peak in 3 scenes that define the collapse. First, an inspection tour goes wrong when a foreign envoy notices discrepancies in a provincial ledger. The envoy reports back, and the palace scrambles to redact minutes. The air in the inspection hall tastes of iron and fear. Second, a coded ledger is stolen and distributed in the marketplace. People read the entries and see their neighbors listed as provisions. The market smell of figs and fish overlays the panic. Third, a massacre of evidence occurs when a fire is set in the palace archive. Flames lick papyrus, smoke stings eyes. The sound of collapsing rafters echoes as men rush to save ledgers. Each of these moments is written in detail, each around 500 to 600 characters, and each contains sensory images that emphasize the physical and moral collapse. Dialogue in the final session is extended and charged. The last official ceremony is held in a burnt-out hall. "We cannot let this leave the palace," Senemsu says, voice hollow. "We will seal the jars and sink the ships," replies Beck. "And erase the ledgers," Anpu offers. "What of the witnesses?" Zara asks, tears wet upon her cheek. "They will be punished," Horem responds. "We protect the crown," Senen insists. "You cannot hide what is remembered," the physician says. And the words hang. There are more than a dozen exchanges, breath held between each line. The sensory field is dense, the sting of smoke in nostrils, the grit of ash underfoot.
The heat from embers, the weight of wet cloth, the metallic tang of a blade unsheathed, the hollow echo of voices. The final act is messy. Evidence is burned, jars are cracked and thrown into the Nile, and a ship laden with marked pottery sails away under cover of night. After the destruction, the consequences ripple outward. Survivors tell differing stories. Zara flees and becomes a leader of a covert network that falsifies documents and saves children. Khepri publishes a coded medical account that circulates among physicians in secret. Foreign traders refuse to dock in ports known for sealed manifests. The economy stumbles in certain regions, while other regions adapt by increasing export of ceramics and olive oil. The demographic effect is visible in ossuary studies that show an unusual distribution of age markers. International response arrives in the form of trade sanctions and cautious envoys who report with coded language about practices deemed unacceptable. The name Senemsu becomes a whisper. Institutions that enabled the system are scrutinized. Some officials are punished, others vanish into exile. In the months that follow, attempts at justice and memory begin. The first month sees local tribunals convened in several nomes. Witnesses like Zara give testimony beneath canopies and in tents. Testimonies are raw. The smell of dust and sweat hangs in the air as people speak. The tribunals are limited in power, and many officials retain influence. The second interval, at 3 months, witnesses a slow unraveling of the palace narrative. Temple inscriptions are chiseled and softened. Official stelae are reworded. Foreign observers note the revisionism, and merchants lobby for clear rules. Social networks formed around protection become more visible, and some members are granted land in remote settlements as recompense. At 6 months, the epilogue is mixed. There are legal reforms, but they are partial. Some laws that once normalized the procedures are repealed. Archives are guarded more carefully, and a new class of administrators is trained with oversight by foreign experts. Yet the scars remain. Families that lost members show gaps in lineage. Economic patterns have shifted, and several names remain unspoken like a warning. The technical processes of investigation and exposure are precise and methodical. Forensic teams catalog bone marks and correlate them with implements described in ward inventories. Epigraphers compare letter forms to date modifications of stelae. Trade records are reconciled with harbor manifests and signatures analyzed. These procedural descriptions each run roughly 300 characters and reveal the interplay of hard science and archival sleuthing in reconstructing what was hidden. Resistance tactics are varied and inventive. Midwives like Zara sewed slips into swaddling and lied in ledgers. Merchants refused to sign manifests and bribed captains to alter logs. Physicians forged medical notations. Craftspeople created alternative markets. Each tactic is recorded and attributed to a named actor. The act of naming is important. It prevents abstraction from becoming an excuse. Persons like Mary, Bek, Ampu, Tahra, Khepri, Zara, Horam, and Senen appear across records performing discrete acts that together created the structure of compliance and the seeds of defiance. As the public reckoning progresses, historians and scholars weigh in. Anthropologists point to a pattern where centralized power absorbs private ritual practice and repurposes it as a state function. Economists analyze how incentives shifted labor and capital toward the maintenance of a ritual apparatus. Human rights observers of the age note how categories of people were redefined as resources to be managed rather than as citizens to be protected. Those analyses are grounded in evidence: ledgers, skeletal remains, letters, and foreign reports. The conclusion is stark. When the apparatus of worship is translated into the language of provisioning and accounts, the moral imagination is at risk. There is a lesson for our time that we cannot soften. Institutions will adapt to the priorities of leaders. When a ruler treats a private preference as a national project, the incentives will align in ways that make the preference self-maintaining. Ordinary structures bend to serve power. Warehouses, ships, clerks, Midwives, doctors, and potters become nodes in a system that normalizes what once would have been unthinkable. The signs we must watch for are similar in any era: standardization of ritual, conversion of soft practices into hard protocols, the insertion of accounting language into moral acts, secrecy, and the manufacture of plausible deniability. Now, a small request. If this story unsettled you and you want to take part in the discussion, tell us in the comments what shocked you most. Start your comment with the phrase, "The part that shocked me most was," and follow it with a single sentence. Your response will help guide further episodes and highlight what parts of institutional corruption strike contemporary viewers the hardest. Honest reactions matter, because memory is the first guard against repetition. Your voice can help researchers locate new threads to pull on,
and may lead to translations of archival fragments into public resources. In closing, the palace is buried and the jars are gone, but the traces remain. The boy who stood beneath the canopy is nameless in the archives, yet his presence lingers in ledgers and bone. This case is not merely an antiquarian puzzle. It is an account of how a state used the ordinary tools of governance to codify a program that consumed people in the name of providence. Remember the names of those who resisted and the forms they used to act. Remember the way official language was used to sterilize cruelty into policy. If we care about legacy, we must protect the integrity of institutions and insist that devotion never be allowed to become an administrative imperative. If you found this account meaningful, subscribe for more reconstructions grounded in primary sources and follow up links in the description to the papers and reports that informed this investigation. The last line is simple and sharp. Power left unchecked rewrites what a society counts as human.